The perfume of mahogany permeated the air, but it reminded me of the end of something. My father, Robert Harrison, sat behind his large wood desk, the weight of his judgment weighing down on me like the thick books that lined his office walls. His Mont Blanc pen scraped across the paper with such severity that it felt like a death sentence. Then he put it down. It's done. He slipped the trust fund transfer forms over the desk, and $2 million, money that was supposed to be split between my sister and me, became completely Elizabeth's. My sister. The golden child. I sat completely still, hands folded neatly in my lap. I wouldn't let them watch me break. My mother, Margaret Harrison, sighed dramatically from her normal throne, a leather recliner by the fireplace. "If you had just followed the path we set for you, Emily," she remarked, shaking her head. "If you had gone to law school like Elizabeth, if I had just done what you wanted," I concluded for her, my voice strangely calm. My dad scowled. "Your sister is a partner at one of the top law firms in the country. Meanwhile, you—" He frowned. Sitting in some apartment playing with computers? There it was, that sentence. Playing with computers. I could have explained. I could have told them the truth. I could have informed them that the modest firm they regarded as a hobby had just received a round of venture capital funding valued at more than $300 million. That my AI-powered fintech technology was on the verge of disrupting global financial markets. That in less than a year, I would not only match but surpass my father's financial worth. But I did not, because they would not hear it. They never had. So instead, I grinned. "You're right, Dad. Elizabeth deserves the money more." Elizabeth's expression showed a glimmer of doubt. For a brief moment, I saw the sister I used to know, the one who stayed up late with me, watching horrible movies and sneaking me out for ice cream after a hard day at school. The one who, until our parents used her accomplishments against me, had truly supported me. "Emily," she said, shifting uneasily. I raised a hand. "It's fine. Congratulations, Liz. You earned it." My father's frown grew as he sensed my lack of reply. "At least stay for dinner," my mother said. "Your father made reservations at Le Bernardin to celebrate Elizabeth's promotion." I surveyed the room, my gaze moving over the shrine to Elizabeth's accomplishment, framed degrees. Law awards. Newspaper clippings documenting her career in the legal profession. There is not a single photograph of me. I turned back to my mother. "I have a meeting," I said while standing, "but enjoy dinner." And with that, I stepped out of the house that had never seemed like home. I did not cry. I did not yell. I never looked back. That night, I kicked off my heels and entered my modest flat, which my father had sneered at. It was not grand. It did not have a marble entryway, a home theater, or a temperature-controlled wine cellar like my parents' homes. But it had everything I needed. The walls were covered in monitors, servers, and code, my true family and future. I sat at my workstation and moved my fingers across the keyboard to activate Aura, Adaptive Universal Risk Analytics, my AI-powered finance platform. Real-time data flowed over the 6 screens in front of me. Numbers, stock movements, and risk considerations. Aura was learning, improving, predicting, and it was great. A notification appeared on my phone. My CTO, Maya Patel, had texted, "VCs rescheduled the meeting for tomorrow." "Are you ready?" I smirked. "More than ready. It's time to change the game." I brought up my pitch deck. Aura surpassed typical trading algorithms by 32%. Major banks had already contacted me, not to dismiss me, but to see how soon they could invest. Another text flashed up. "Elizabeth, sorry about Dad. You know how he gets. The trust fund isn't important, right? You are doing well with your PC." Despite her best intentions, Elizabeth ignored my efforts. I breathed slowly. "Thank you, Liz. Enjoy your supper." Then I returned to my screens. The trust fund was never about money. I had plenty of it before. It was about recognition. But tonight something changed inside me. I did not need my father's approval. I was ready to ensure that the entire world saw me. The next morning, I delivered my pitch to a room full of venture capitalists. I observed their expressions as I guided them through Aura's performance measurements. I could see it, the instant they realized. They recognized this was more than simply another AI startup. This was the future. Then, halfway through the meeting, I reached a decision, a daring one. I shut my laptop and leaned forward. "We don't need your money." Silence. Maya smirked as she stared at me. The chief investor lifted his eyebrow. "Excuse me?" I folded my hands together. "Instead of taking your capital, we want a partner. Gain access to your networks, your clients. That's far more valuable than funding we no longer need." More silence. Then one of the senior partners smiled. "That's a hell of a strategy, Ms. Harrison." 6 months later, Aura was completely operating. We had a $40 million headquarters in Manhattan, only blocks from Wall Street. I no longer felt disappointed. My father had spent his entire career working with financial institutions, which I was in charge of. I wasn't finished. Definitely not. It wasn't simply about success. This was about legacy, and I was not inheriting one. I was building my own. Success does not occur overnight, but the night before you can feel it coming. I didn't get much sleep following the investor meeting. I did not need to. Instead, I sat in my tiny apartment basking in the light from my 6 monitors, watching Aura work in real-time market fluctuation, trading trends, social sentiment analysis. She was learning and winning. Every prediction she made was correct. Not all of the time, not the majority of the time, every single time. The venture capitalists I met with offered me $50 million. I turned them down, not because I didn't want the cash, because I didn't need it. I needed access, influence, and most importantly, control. This was my firm, and I was not handing over the reins to anyone. My phone buzzed the next morning before I even had my first cup of coffee. Maya Patel, my CTO, was already up and running. "Emily, you should see this." I got out of my recliner, still wearing the sweater and leggings I'd fallen asleep in, and checked my inbox. So there it was, an invitation. This is not coming from a venture capitalist, not from a technology incubator, but from Goldman Sachs. They wanted a private demonstration of Aura, not a pitch, not an investment opportunity, a demonstration. This meant one thing. They already knew. They knew Aura was effective, and they were interested. I called Maya immediately. "How did they find us?" "My guess? Word leaked after the investor meeting," she told me. "One of the VCs probably tipped them off, doesn't matter. The point is, they're here, they're watching, and they want in." I exhaled. This was happening faster than anticipated, and I wasn't going to muck it up. "Set up the demo," I instructed, "and make sure they leave the room knowing we're the ones in control." A few hours later, I received a text from Elizabeth. "Dad is inquiring about you. He says he hasn't heard from you in months. What are you working on?" I rolled my eyes. "How are you? Really? I'm proud of you. Simply, Dad is asking," I typed back. "I've been busy." A few seconds later, another text appears. Jim Thompson just left my office, appearing as if he had seen a ghost. "What the hell are you doing over there?" I smirked. Jim Thompson, the senior partner at Elizabeth's law practice. He had unexpectedly visited my office earlier that week. He tried to get me to sign with his firm. They tried to assure me that they could match whatever Goldman Sachs offered. I'd graciously rejected and relished every moment of it. I did not answer to Elizabeth's message. Allow her to sit with the uncertainty. Let her ponder. Because I was finally in control. The conference room in our new Manhattan office was sleek, futuristic, and designed for power moves. When the 5 Goldman Sachs executives strolled in, they tried to seem cool, but I could see it. the way their gazes shifted to the big panels displaying Aura's live predictions. They knew. They came because they had overheard the murmurs. "Ms. Harrison," their lead executive said, offering me his hand. "Thank you for taking this meeting on short notice." I shook his hand but did not sit. "I assume you wouldn't be here unless you already knew what Aura could do." He smiled slightly. "We've heard promising things, but we need to see it for ourselves." I motioned toward the screens. "Watch and learn." Maya entered the stage and walked them through Aura's features, how she processed millions of data points every second, how she predicted key market swings days before they occurred, how she had already outperformed all other algorithms by 32%. We next showed them the real-time test. We entered live financial data, Aura conducted her analysis, and in less than a minute, she made a prediction. "This stock is going to drop by 7% in the next 48 hours, Maya stated, pointing to the screen. One of Goldman's executives leaned forward. "And how certain is the system?" Maya grinned. 99.8%. Silence. One of the executives tapped swiftly on his phone, most likely for fact-checking. Another person scratched his jaw deep in meditation. The lead executive then looked at me. "Ms. Harrison," he stated with measured voice. "We'd like to discuss partnership terms." I crossed my arms. "We don't sell. We don't give up equity. If you want in, it's on our terms." His lips curved into a sneer. "I respect that." I looked at Maya. She knew we had just won the game. That night, after the Goldman demonstration, Elizabeth texted me again. "Dad wants to discuss?" I stared at my phone. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the best of me, so I called. He picked up on the first ring. "Emily," his voice was strained. "We need to have a conversation." I leaned against my desk. "About what?" "I just got a call from one of my contacts at Goldman Sachs," he told me. "Apparently, my daughter is making waves on Wall Street." I smiled. And here I thought I was just playing with computers. Silence. "Then take a slow exhale." "I may have underestimated you," he said. I did not respond, because I wasn't sure whether I believed him yet. Then he said something that left me speechless. "I want to meet." "In person." I blinked. "Why?" "Because I need to understand exactly what you've built," explained the man, "and how it's going to change the world." I did not respond right away. I heard something fresh in his voice, not simply curiosity, not merely a surprise. However, show respect, the thing I had never received from him. I suddenly knew. It wasn't simply about business. This was about power. For the first time, he recognized me as a player. And this was worth more than any trust fund. My father requested a meeting. For the first time in my life, he reached out to me, not because he missed me, not because he wished to make amends, but I had done something that made him see me differently. I should have said no, should have left him in his ignorance. But there was a small, stubborn part of me that wanted to look him in the eyes and see when he actually realized what I had created. So I agreed. We met at the Peninsula, which is one of his favorite spots, the type of establishment where deals were done over $400 stakes and a handshake might change the fate of an industry. I arrived first. I wanted him to walk in and realize that I already had control of the room, and when he did, his face was unreadable. He was a man who had spent decades negotiating multi-million-dollar real estate deals and could detect weakness from across the boardroom. What about today? He wasn't sure what to make of me. He took a seat. For the first time ever, he waited for me to speak first. I let the silence stretch. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to experience the discomfort of not knowing where he stood. "So," I said, swirling my wine glass, "you wanted to talk." He breathed slowly. "I got a call from one of my associates at Goldman Sachs. They said you're doing something big." I raised an eyebrow. Doing something big? That's how they phrased it? He nodded. They wouldn't give me details, but they said aura is something that could change the way financial markets operate. I leaned forwards. And that's the only reason you wanted to see me? Because suddenly I'm useful? He did not flinch. Emily, you have to understand. Business is about results, perception. It's never personal. I laughed. You're wrong about that, Dad. It's always personal. His jaw stiffened. I underestimated you. There it was. I'd been waiting my whole life to hear this admission. But that wasn't enough. Underestimated me? I said, bending my head. Dad, you didn't just underestimate me, you wrote me off. Because I thought you were making a mistake, he responded calmly. I thought you were throwing away your future. I was wrong. I studied him. I wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't something I gave readily anymore. What do you want? I inquired honestly. He paused for a fraction of a second. And at that moment, I knew. He was not just come to talk. He was here to negotiate. I want in, he finally said. I want to invest in aura. I sat back. Of course, with aura on the verge of controlling the banking industry, he now desired a seat at the table. I should have laughed in his face, should have told him to go to hell. Instead, I did exactly what he would have done. I played the game. What do you have to offer? I said, as if conversing with any other investor. His eyes clouded somewhat. He was not used to proving himself to anyone, especially his own daughter. I have relationships with every major player in real estate, finance, and private equity. If you're looking for strategic partnerships, I can open doors that no one else can. I nodded, pretending to consider it. Interesting, I replied. And why would I need you to do that when I already have Goldman Sachs and half of Wall Street at my doorstep? He exhaled and rubbed his chin. I can help you navigate power structures that you don't even realize exist yet. I smirked. You mean like the ones that kept me out of the family trust fund? He did not respond to that. Instead, he analyzed me as if I were one of his real estate transactions, assessing, calculating. Then he leaned forward slightly. You're not the same girl who left this family 3 years ago? He stated calmly. I shake my head. No, I'm not. Then let me be clear, he said. If you take this company public, it's going to rattle the entire financial world. Some people will want to work with you. Others will want to tear you down. You need allies. Power protects power. I retained his stare. For the first time in my life, I recognized myself in him. The brutality, the desire for control, the refusal to let others dictate the rules. But the difference was that I had established my kingdom without him, and I aimed to maintain it that way. I'll think about your offer, I answered calmly, knowing full well I wouldn't accept it. He nodded, but I could tell he knew too. A week following our encounter, I received something unexpected, a letter from Elizabeth. It was not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter. I hesitated to open it, then I read. Emily, I'm not sure how to express this, so I'll just be blunt. I was mistaken. About everything. I spent years believing that I was the one who did everything right, and you were the one who squandered her potential. But the reality is, I never felt I had a choice. I followed the road laid out for me because I didn't want to disappoint them. And you? You did something I never had the courage to do. You created something for yourself. I want to be a part of it. Not because I am your sister, but I do believe in what you've produced. And I think for the first time in my life, I want to do something meaningful. Would you consider letting me in, Elizabeth? I sat there staring at the letter for quite some time. Then I grabbed up my phone to text her. Let us chat. Because while my father would never be involved, Elizabeth might be. Maybe after all this time, she was also ready to break free. 2 weeks later, I stood in the center of Aura's new headquarters, overlooking Manhattan. The initial public offering was scheduled to take place within 24 hours. My company was set to be valued at more than $800 million, and I was about to be a billionaire. I should have felt nervous. But I was not, because I constructed it from the ground up. And now, the entire world was finally watching. Those who dismissed me, those who doubted me, my family cut me out. They were all looking to see exactly who I had become, and I was only getting started. The night before the IPO, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous, not because I was afraid, but I could feel the weight of what was to come. I sat in my penthouse, which I had moved into after closing the deal with Goldman, overlooking Manhattan. Floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant leather furnishings, and modern artwork. Everything in this room was mine, not handed down, not inherited, built. Maya had gone hours earlier when we finalized the last-minute investor allocations. Everything was ready. Tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m., the opening bell would sound. And Aura, the company they claimed was just me playing with computers, would be worth more than $800 million. I sipped my whiskey while looking at my reflection in the glass. 3 years ago, I walked out of a family meal where they called me a failure. Tomorrow, I'd enter the New York Stock Exchange as its youngest female CEO. Funny how life works. My phone vibrated at exactly 10:42 p.m. Elizabeth, I contemplated ignoring it. Then I saw the message. "I need to see you. It is about Dad." I frowned. Elizabeth had not asked for anything since she sent that letter. She'd spent the previous few weeks proving herself, working with our legal team to improve the contracts for our relationships, trying to establish a place in my universe. So if she was reaching out right now, it had to be important. I got my coat and went downstairs. We met in a hotel's private lounge in Midtown. Elizabeth was already there, holding a glass of wine. She seemed exhausted. "You came," she told me as I sat down. "You said it was about Dad," I explained. "Talk." She paused. Then she dug into her bag and took out a folder. She slid it along the table. I did not move. "Just open it," she insisted, her voice taut. I flipped it open. And frozen. It was a report, one of those internal business evaluations that never made it beyond the boardroom. However, I only needed to read the first few words to grasp what it meant. My father's company was in trouble. Deep problem. Their debt had exceeded their assets. Several major investors were pulling out. If things continued as they were, Harrison Enterprises would fail within a year. I looked up to her. "Why are you showing me this?" She exhaled. "Because Dad isn't going to admit it, and because I know exactly what he's going to do next." I leaned back. "Let me guess. He's going to try to use me." She nodded. "He'll wait until Aura's IPO goes live. Then he'll try to leverage your success to save himself. He'll spin a story. Say it was his mentorship that helped you get here. Try to attach himself to your name so investors think Harrison Enterprises is still powerful." I was not surprised. This was precisely the type of action he would make. "Let me guess," I replied. "He thinks I owe him that much?" Elizabeth offered a tired smile. "I don't think he realizes that you're not the same girl he disowned 3 years ago." I closed the folder. "So what do you want me to do?" Her jaw stiffened. "I want you to make sure he doesn't get away with it." I studied her. "Why do you care?" "Because I'm tired of watching him manipulate everyone," she told me. "And because you're right. He never respected either of us. He just wanted control." I stared at her for a long time. Then I took up the folder. "I'll handle it." By the time I returned to my apartment, I knew precisely what I needed to do. If my father intended to use my success to prop up his crumbling empire, I would ensure that the entire world knew the truth beforehand. I called Maya. "How fast can we get a financial analyst to go public with a report on Harrison Enterprises' real situation?" She did not even hesitate. "Tomorrow morning, right before the IPO." I smiled. "Do it." The New York Stock Exchange was a frenzy of cameras, investors, and flashing lights. I stepped in, flanked by my teammates, past reporters yelling my name. "Emily, how does it feel to be the youngest female CEO taking a company public? Is it true that Goldman Sachs is backing Aura's expansion? What do you say to those who doubted you?" I did not stop. Didn't respond. I just strode past the crowd, my heels tapping against the marble floor, and headed straight for the stage. And then I saw him, my father, standing at the front of the crowd. They are watching me. I met his gaze. I smirked, because I already knew he'd seen the report, the one who revealed his company's debt, the one outlining his inevitable demise. His final move had failed before he ever attempted it. And now, I was untouchable. I stepped onto the podium. The entire room became silent. I stared out at the sea of people, investors, analysts, CEOs. They had spent their entire careers underestimating women like me. And then I rang the opening bell. The sound resonated down the hall. The stock price flashed across the board. It surpassed projections in the first 30 seconds. Within minutes, Aura was valued at $900 million. By midday, it would have surpassed $1 billion. Just like that, I became a billionaire. I stepped down from the podium and my father was waiting for me. "Emily," he said, his voice calm. "We need to talk." I raised an eyebrow. "Do we?" He forced a smile. "We could do great things together. Now that you've established yourself—" "I don't need you," I stated calmly. "And neither does Aura." For the first time, I noticed a flash of genuine panic in his eyes. "Emily." "No, Dad." I leaned in slightly and lowered my voice. "You spent years telling me I was nothing without this family, that I was wasting my potential, that I would fail." I pointed to the stock board, where Aura's value was steadily rising. "Take a good look at that. Because that's me. Without you." His jaw was locked. He was not used to losing, and yet here he was. I took a step backward. "Good luck with your company, Dad. You'll need it." Then I turned to walk away. That night, I rejoiced with my teammates. The champagne was pricey. The energy was electrical. But what was the most memorable occasion for me? I climbed onto the balcony of my apartment and gazed out at the city I had controlled. And Elizabeth stood next to me, holding her own glass of champagne. "You did it," she stated softly. I turned to face her. "We did it." She had stepped away from his world, too. And that was a victory that no stock price could match. Winning feels different from what I imagined. I expected to feel ecstatic, weightless, as if the years of doubt, dismissal, and being regarded as nothing more than the disappointment would finally end. But standing on the balcony of my penthouse, overlooking Manhattan and having $1 billion corporation to my name, I felt something different, something heavier. It was not regret, it was not sadness, it was clarity. I'd won. However, winning meant something else today. It wasn't only about proving my father wrong. It was about what happened next. Because this was not the finish line. This was only the beginning. The day after Aura's IPO, my father's failed attempt to capitalize on my achievement was all over the financial headlines. Harrison Enterprises' stock had plunged. Investors were fleeing. In just 24 hours, the company's valuation had dropped by 25%. And the press? Oh, they ate it up. Harrison Enterprises struggles as CEO's daughter becomes a billionaire without him. The Financial Times power shift on Wall Street. Emily Harrison's empire rises, while her father's crumbles. Bloomberg. Karma? The man who disowned his daughter now needs her to save his company. Forbes. I scanned the headlines with my morning espresso, not bothering to hide my smirk. Maya entered my office, coffee in hand. "I assume you've seen the news?" I nodded. "Better than expected. We're getting calls from multiple firms asking if we're interested in acquiring parts of Harrison Enterprises," she told me. "Their investors are panicking." I slumped back in my chair. "And what's your opinion?" Maya smirked. I think watching your father squirm is more satisfying than buying his dying company." She was not mistaken, but I wasn't finished with him yet. I wanted him to come to me. For once, he needed me. I wanted to hear him say it aloud. It took 3 days. Then my phone rang. I let it ring twice before responding. "Emily," my father's voice came over the line. It sounded odd, tighter, less sure. "Dad," I said casually as ever. There was a pause. A long one. "We need to talk." I already knew what this was about, but I really wanted to hear him say it. "About?" I inquired, drinking my coffee. "About the company," he finally said. "We're in a difficult situation, and I—" He stopped himself. The words were hurtful to him. I smiled. "And you what?" Another pause. Then he exhaled sharply. "And I need your help." There it was, the moment I'd been waiting for. Robert Harrison, the man who had shut me out of his life, was now seeking for my assistance. I should have let him suffer, should have let him drown. But it wasn't simply about vengeance anymore. This was about control. "Meet me tomorrow morning," I stated. "We'll discuss your options." And then I hung up. We met at Aura's headquarters, in my corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook Wall Street. I made certain he sat in the guest chair. He appeared smaller than I remembered, less like the towering man who once had complete control, more like someone who realized he had lost. "Let's get to the point," I said. "What do you need?" He sat up taller, hoping to regain control of the conversation. "We need a liquidity injection. Investors are pulling out. If we don't stabilize, Harrison Enterprises won't last the year." I leaned back and tapped my fingers on my desk. "And why should I care?" His jaw stiffened. "Because this is family," he explained. "And despite everything, you're still a Harrison." I gave out a quiet laugh. "That's funny," I said. "Because 3 years ago, you told me I wasn't part of this family anymore." He had the decency to appear uncomfortable. "I made a mistake," he acknowledged. "I didn't see what you were capable of." I raised an eyebrow. "And now that I'm successful, suddenly I'm worth your time?" Silence. He knew I was correct. I leaned forwards. "Let me be clear," I explained. "I don't owe you anything, not after the way you treated me, not after you wrote me off, but—" I paused, watching his frustration mount. "I'm willing to make a deal." His eyes narrowed. "What kind of deal?" I smiled. "I buy out Harrison Enterprises." He froze. "Buy it out?" he repeated. "Yes," I answered. "You sell me the company, every share, every asset, and you walk away." His fists clenched. "You want me to sell you my life's work?" "Yes," I replied, meeting his eyes without blinking. "Because let's be real, Dad. You already lost it. The only choice left is who takes it from you. And I promise you, if it's not me, it'll be someone worse." His breathing was irregular now. This was humiliation he never expected. He sat there, staring at me, fighting to accept that his daughter, whom he had before discarded as a failure, was now the one person capable of saving him. "If I say no?" he questioned, his voice taut. I shrugged. "Then you watch your company collapse, publicly, slowly, and painfully." Silence. "Finally, I'll need to discuss it with my board." I nodded. "You do that." But we knew the truth. He had no other options. A week later, the documents were signed. Harrison Enterprises was officially mine. Headlines were everywhere. In a ruthless power move, Emily Harrison buys out her father's company, CNBC. The ultimate turnaround. Billionaire CEO acquires business that once disowned. Her Wall Street Journal, Robert Harrison's empire, now belongs to his daughter, and she has big plans. Forbes. I strolled into my father's former office, taking in the mahogany desk, leather chair, and framed images of himself. Then I turned to face Elizabeth, who had joined me. "So," she replied, leaning against the doorway, "what now?" I smiled. "Now?" I asked. Now we build something better. And with that, I took my seat at the desk once occupied by the guy who had never believed in me. Why this? This was my empire now. Taking all my father built should have felt like the ultimate triumph. For a while it did. I sat in his old office in the chair where he formerly stared down at me and enjoyed the moment, not out of pettiness, not out of vengeance, but this was mine now. I did not need his approval. I did not need his approval. I outgrew that a long time ago. But I did need to decide what to do next. Because Harrison Enterprises, throughout its history, was dying, and if I took it, I was going to transform it into something new, something better, something that he will never own again. A few weeks after the takeover, my father sought one final meeting, not in his former office, not in the boardroom, but in a calm park outside the city. I met him there, under the dark sky, surrounded by the changing autumn leaves. He appeared older now, not merely because of time. Losing power aged you in ways that nothing else can. So, he replied, his voice solid but free of conceit. What happens now? I met his gaze. Now I will rebuild it. Without you. He breathed and nodded slowly. I figured as much. Silence stretched between us. For once, he wasn't attempting to control the conversation, wasn't trying to win. Perhaps because deep down he knew I had already won. I was wrong about you, he confessed. I see that now. I studied with him. And does that change anything? He squeezed his lips together. No. I nodded. Then we're done here. I turned to leave, and for the first time in my life, he did not deter me. Months have passed. Harrison Enterprises was no more. I demolished everything piece by piece until nothing left of the empire my father had ruled. In its place, I built something new, a branch of Aura focusing on financial accessibility, built not for the wealthy but for those who had been excluded from the system for far too long. It became the most successful initiative I'd ever started, not because of money, not because of power, but it was mine. No trust fund. There is no inheritance. There is no family name. It's just me. One evening, as I stood in my office, Elizabeth entered. You did it, she remarked as we looked out at the city. All of it. I smiled. We did. She had chosen her own route too because, ultimately, it wasn't just about breaking free from our father's control, it was about creating something better, so we did. On our own terms. Story 2, 6 a.m. on a Sunday. My husband wasn't in bed when I woke up. He was also absent from our home. A message in the refrigerator. Farewell. In any case, I never loved you. Credit card and bank app fraud notifications began to appear on Monday, but I had to chuckle because... What are you saying? I have an overdrawn account. As Brandon's sister yelled at him for the rent money he had given her, I looked at my phone in faux amazement and exclaimed, That's not possible. What did he do? I let her think I was just finding out about my husband's betrayal by speaking steadily. I'm Isla Thompson, and one of the worst decisions I've ever made was marrying Brandon. Not in his mind, though. Even though I had been anticipating it, it felt like a slap in the face when I woke up that Sunday morning to find an empty bed and a nasty letter on the refrigerator. Farewell. In any case, I never loved you. Very elegant. Brandon, as a forensic accountant in Milwaukee, I have been investigating financial fraud for some of the largest Midwest companies for the past 15 years. Let's just say that my own spouse wasn't exactly dealing with an amateur when he began to show symptoms of organizing his big escape 3 months ago. His increased interest in our finances and his questions about our retirement accounts were the first warning signs, after allowing me to manage everything for years. Then came the hidden phone conversations, the mysterious absences, and the way he'd alter his computer screen whenever I went into the room. Typical indications of someone preparing to flee. I'd seen it all before in my line of work. What Brandon never comprehended was that every questionable transaction, every concealed purchase, every attempt to stealthily relocate our money, I saw it all. Every action he performed in an attempt to defraud me was recorded, captured on camera, and forwarded directly to my attorney. He thought he had pulled off the ideal getaway when he left that letter. But I had previously shifted our funds, tagged our accounts, and planned for every possible scenario he would try. I couldn't help but smile as the fraud notifications began to flood my phone that Monday morning. Brandon believed he was 10 steps ahead, but he was unaware that he was putting himself in a dangerous situation. Notifications, declined transactions, unsuccessful withdrawal attempts, and blocked accounts continued beeping on the phone. Each one was like melody to my ears. My palm touched the just-in-case folder on my desk, which contained months' worth of evidence that would ruin not only his escape strategy, but his whole future. I nearly felt terrible for him when I heard his sister's frantic voice on the phone. Nearly. I may have seemed distraught to you, learning that I was never truly loved by my 8-year husband. The problem with being a forensic accountant, however, is this. You get the ability to recognize patterns. When they conceal something, people believe they are being clever. Money, however, leaves a trace. Always. Brandon as well. He covered everything with breadcrumbs. 6 years ago, Brandon and I met at a charity gala. He seemed to have his life together, was charming, and was successful, or so he said. He drove a fancy car, worked as an investment advisor, and discussed creating a future with her. I was amazed by his confidence, his desire. In hindsight, I should have seen how evasive he was about his history and how he consistently sidestepped inquiries about his clientele. I adore it. At least I believed that the first 3 years were good. We discussed establishing a baby, planned exotic holidays, and purchased a lovely home in the Milwaukee suburbs. He would become defensive whenever I questioned him about his student loans, or he would shift the topic when I brought up meeting his former coworkers, but there were always these minor details that didn't quite add up. "You don't trust me," he'd say, turning it around on me. "You need to know everything, but why? Don't you think I can handle my own finances?" Traditional manipulation. I'd seen it numerous times in my career. People employing emotional influence to avoid financial openness. However, I chose to overlook it because I wanted to have faith in us, within him. That was my first error. Then came the indications I couldn't ignore. Last Christmas, he insisted on separate accounts for our holiday spending. "It'll be more romantic if we surprise each other," he said. However, I saw the credit card statements that he believed he had concealed, which showed purchases at upscale jewelry retailers. I never got any jewelry. The weekend business trips that didn't match any conferences I could find. The mysterious calls from numbers that always went straight to voicemail when I was around. Not most wives might have confronted their husbands immediately, but I'm not most wives. Rather, I began obtaining bank statements, monitoring transactions, and constructing a case. He was actually providing me with more proof each time he believed he was hiding something. I assumed I was unaware of everything as I watched him attempt to gradually deplete our accounts. Once more, "You're working late," he'd ask, feigning concern while I sat at my computer. "Just catching up on some cases," I'd say, not revealing that the case I was working on was his. 3 weeks ago was the tipping point. I was working late, truly late this time, when my coworker Susan raced to my desk. Her face was pale, and she was holding her phone like it could bite her. "You need to see this," she said, her voice shaking. "I was reviewing the Thompson case files when I found something. It has to do with Brandon." My stomach dropped as I looked at her screen. It was there. Brandon's name linked to a series of suspicious transactions we were investigating, not as a witness or a victim, but as a person of interest. The same patterns I've been tracking in our personal accounts were showing up in his professional dealings. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was running from something far greater. "There's more," Susan whispered, scrolling through the documents. "He's been named in 3 other fraud investigations. Different states, different names, but the same M.O. He seeks successful ladies, marries them, then vanishes with their money. Just before he relocated to Milwaukee, the last one took place in Phoenix. The parts began to fit together. The charm, the secrecy, the sudden interest in our finances. It was all part of his program. I wasn't his spouse. I was his next aim. And he had no idea that his newest mark was someone who specialized in capturing individuals precisely like him." That night, I sat in our kitchen until daybreak, going through everything with fresh eyes. The loving husband act, the careful manipulation, the way he'd slowly tried to isolate me from my friends and family. It was also clear now. I found myself giggling, not because it was hilarious, but because of the sheer irony. He'd picked the wrong woman to con. As if nothing were wrong, I prepared every morning for the next 3 weeks at Kiss Him Goodbye. Every night I'd listen to his tales about work while logging every questionable transaction. I relocated our funds, called the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and gathered information that would not only protect me, but aid his prior victims. "You appear different now." "One night," he said, examining my face. "Is everything all right?" I grinned as I considered the trap I had built and how his own conceit would ultimately lead to his demise. "Just exhausted from work," I said. "This time of year you are aware of how things may get." He nodded sympathetically, probably believing I was working hard to acquire more money for him to take. If he'd paid more attention, he may have caught the glitter in my eye, the one that claimed I was fully aware of his plans. But con men like Brandon never think they'll be the ones getting conned. And that's the problem with those who earn a living by deceiving others. They don't anticipate being the ones being played. His plan began to take shape the morning after Brandon vanished, just as he had anticipated. The first call came from our bank. Unusual behavior. Multiple withdrawal attempts. All credit cards were used up. His sister Kelly, who was furious over the money he had borrowed, gave him the second. The third came from Rachel Clark in Phoenix, who wanted to know whether I knew the whereabouts of her husband. Her spouse. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "I apologize." "What were you saying?" I sat down at my kitchen table and tightened my hold on my phone. Brandon Murphy. Legally, he is still my husband. Anger tightened Rachel's voice as she explained. "He disappeared with my savings 3 years ago. Since then, I've been following him. In spite of myself, I smile. In fact, he went by Brandon Thompson here. And you're not going to believe this, but I've been awaiting your call." Rachel and I compared notes over the course of the following hour. Same attractive smile, same investment advisor tale, same practice of steadily emptying funds before leaving. However, there was one significant distinction this time. "Me? I've gathered enough evidence to bring him down," I informed her. "But I need your aid to catch him." At that moment, a text message from Brandon buzzed through my phone. "I apologize. Can we discuss just one final time?" "Excellent." He was following the pattern I discovered in Rachel's case, reaching out after the initial disappearance, trying to manipulate his way into one last chance to access any remaining funds. I showed the text to my lawyer, who was already preparing our counterattack. "Let's set the trap," she said, her eyes gleaming. I consented to meet Brandon in a downtown coffee shop. He was there when I got there, looking suitably repentant. His eyes were red. His garments were a little rumpled. The ideal representation of a man who had committed a grave error. Isla. "I'm so sorry." He started to reach across the table for my hand. "I've been dealing with some terrible investments and other stuff. I went into a panic. I pulled my hand away, playing my part perfectly. "How much trouble are you in, Brandon?" His eyes lit up. Just a flicker. But I caught it. He thought I was falling for it. "About $200,000. But I have a plan to remedy everything." I just need access to our emergency fund. I feigned to contemplate it, watching him squirm. The emergency fund. Correct. The one you attempted to empty yesterday. Before he recovered, his face fell for a brief moment. That was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly, but if you help me now, I promise to what? To disappear again, or to remain around long enough to deplete my accounts as you did to Rachel in Phoenix. For the first time since I'd known him, the color faded from his face. Murphy, Brandon Thompson, or whatever his true name was, looked genuinely shocked. You know, the funny thing is, I continued, sliding a folder across the table, if you'd done your research, you might have realized that stealing from a forensic accountant wasn't your smartest move. Just then, 2 FBI agents approached our table. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Oh, and Brandon, you might want to call a lawyer. As the FBI agents led Brandon away, it was a good one. My phone lit up with a call from Susan. She couldn't have come at a better time. We've got him, she said, her voice triumphant. The team just finished analyzing those offshore accounts you flagged. Brandon isn't just running a marriage con, he's been operating a massive Ponzi scheme. We're looking at fraud in the 1 million. I watched through the coffee shop window as Brandon was placed in a federal vehicle. He looked small now. Nothing like the confident man who thought he'd outsmarted me. How many victims? I asked, already knowing the answer would be ugly. 23 so far, spanning 5 states, 12 marriages, all to successful women in finance. But here's the kicker. He was planning something bigger. We found evidence of a new investment firm he was setting up. He was going to use your credentials and reputation to lure in high-net-worth clients. I thought about all those late nights when he'd ask about my cases, showing sudden interest in my work. He wasn't being supportive. He was gathering information, planning to exploit my professional reputation for his biggest scam yet. The irony, I said, is that if he hadn't gotten greedy, if he just stuck to his usual marriage scam, he might have gotten away again, but he just had to go bigger. That's not even the best part, Susan continued. Remember that country club membership he insisted on last year? Turns out he was using it to meet his next target, Caroline Mitchell, the hedge fund manager. He was already laying the groundwork for his next disappearing act. I recalled all the Sunday golf games, the late-night networking events while he was playing the devoted husband at home. He was setting up his next victim. But Caroline Mitchell wasn't just ordinary hedge fund manager. She was one of my closest friends, and she'd been working with me to capture Brandon's every action for months. Let me guess, I said. Caroline gave you access to all their private conversations, every email, every text, every recorded discussion in the club lounge. He practically offered us a plan of his entire enterprise while attempting to entice her. The guy practically wrote our case for us. I couldn't help but chuckle. Brandon had spent months methodically organizing his exit, thinking he was the brightest person in the room. Meanwhile, every individual he believed he was influencing had been working together, compiling a watertight case against him. Have you heard from his sister Kelly? I asked, thinking of her anxious phone this morning. That's another fascinating thread, Susan answered. Turns out she's not his sister at all. She's an accomplice. They've been conducting the fraud together for years. She plays the desperate sister to explain why he needs to borrow money urgently right before he disappears. As we speak, she is being picked up in Chicago. I reclined in my chair and absorbed everything. Brandon's blindness was as astounding as the extent of his deceit. He had been so preoccupied with keeping his lies true that he had failed to see the trap that was closing in on him. Susan said there was one more thing. We discovered who he really was. He is neither Murphy nor Brandon Thompson. This is Brandon Roberts, who has been wanted in Canada since 2015 for fraud. As I considered the enormous case file that was awaiting me on my desk, I grinned. Well, Brandon Roberts, welcome to your worst nightmare. My phone buzzed once again just as I was about to return to the office. It came from an unidentified number this time. You don't know what's going to happen, but but you think you're smart. Examine your email. The message was followed by an email featuring extensive images of me with my family, my daily routines, even views through my home windows. Anger, not fear, was what sent a shiver down my spine. Brandon had hired someone to watch me. I called Agent Morrison, the FBI agent handling Brandon's case, after forwarding everything to Susan and my attorney. "There's already another player on the game," she said. "The photos were sent from an IP address we've been monitoring James Foster, Brandon's former cellmate from a brief stint in Phoenix. As Brandon's muscle, he has been intimidating victims who approach too closely in order to reveal the plan." I wondered if this was the reason Rachel Clark had been silent for so long. "Now, where is he?" "That's the problem. We can't locate him, but he's probably..." Agent Morrison stopped mid-sentence. "Wait a moment. One of Brandon's frozen accounts is moving. Someone from inside your home is attempting to access it." "My house? Where?" I'd left my laptop open. I gave Rachel a call right away. "Is everything okay there?" "We've got a problem," she muttered. "Kelly's here. She must have had a key. She's trying to access Brandon's accounts from your computer. Kelly, the false sister who was supposed to be in detention in Chicago." My mind raced through the possibilities. Either she'd escaped, or Rachel. "Get out of there now. Kelly's not working alone." I heard a crash in the background, followed by Rachel's sharp intake of breath. "Too late. Foster's here too." My heart pounded, but my mind remained clear. This was exactly the type of desperate action I'd imagined. "Rachel, remember what we discussed? The time has come." I heard Rachel's cool voice over the phone. "Hey, Kelly, before you do anything stupid, you might want to look at what's on that screen." Knowing exactly what they were observing, I grinned. Not all of the evidence, accounts, or files were simply kept on my laptop. The FBI servers were receiving a live stream of it. Plus, the whole house was under surveillance with agents stationed nearby. "It's finished," I heard Rachel say. "Look outside." Within minutes, FBI agents descended upon my home, and sirens blared in the background. Both Kelly and Foster were in custody, and Rachel was safe. I drove home to find Agent Morrison waiting for me. "Quite a performance," she said. "You knew they'd try something like this. People like Brandon, Kelly, and Foster, they always get desperate at the end. They're so used to being in control that they can't handle losing it." I looked at my house now, a crime scene. I just had to make them think they had one last chance to win. Well, with this attempted break-in and the threats, we can add witness intimidation and conspiracy charges to their list. Agent Morrison smiled. "I'd say your trap worked perfectly. I thought about Brandon sitting in his cell, probably still believing he could talk his way out of this. He had no idea that his desperate final move had just given us everything we needed to ensure he'd never scam anyone again." 2 months later, I sat in the courtroom watching Brandon's world crumble around him. Gone was the confident smile, replaced by a look of utter defeat as the judge read out his sentence. Brandon Roberts for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. This court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. I caught his eye as they led him away for a moment. His mask slipped completely, and I saw the panic beneath the man who'd written "Never loved you anyway" on a note in my fridge. Now faced a future where love was the least of his concerns. Kelly and Foster didn't fare much better. Both took plea deals, but they'd still serve significant time as part of their agreements. They provided evidence against Brandon's entire network, exposing operations in 3 countries. Rachel sat beside me, squeezing my hand as Brandon's victims, my unexpected sisters in survival, stood one by one to share their impact statements. Each woman told a similar story of betrayal, but ended with the same note of triumph. We'd not only gotten justice, we'd gotten our power back. After the sentencing, Agent Morrison approached me with a smile. "The Bureau could use someone with your skills. Have you ever considered consulting for us? I thought about all the other Brandons out there, All the scammers who thought they were too clever to get caught. What do you know? I think I'd like that. As I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Milwaukee sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. Brandon thought he destroyed me, but he'd only made me stronger. And now I had a new mission, ensuring he would be the last con man to underestimate a woman with a talent for numbers and a mind for justice. 6 months after Brandon's sentencing, I stood at a podium in a packed conference room at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division in Milwaukee. Behind me was a presentation detailing what they now called the Thompson case. Though that wasn't his real name or mine anymore. I'd taken back my maiden name, wanting nothing to do with any of Brandon's aliases. The modern con artist doesn't use a gun. I told the room full of agents and analysts. They use trust, manipulation, and technology, but they all leave a trail. You just have to know where to look. The program I developed with the FBI was already showing results. 3 major romance scam rings have been busted in the past month alone. Rachel had become one of our most valuable consultants, her experience helping us understand how these predators chose their targets. After the presentation, I checked my phone to find a message from Susan. Another victim of Brandon's had been located in Vancouver. Unlike the rest of us, she'd lost everything: her house, her savings, her business. But this time, we could help her recover what was stolen. The forensic team had finally cracked Brandon's encrypted files, revealing accounts he'd hidden all over the world. I thought about that Sunday morning when I found his note, how he tried to break me with 5 cruel words. Instead, he'd given me a gift, the chance to help others fight back against people like him. My new apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, and as I sat on my balcony that evening, I smiled at the irony. Brandon had spent his life taking things from strong women, but in the end, he'd inadvertently created something powerful. A network of survivors turned warriors, all dedicated to taking down men like him. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Story 3. I informed my family that I was laid off from a well-paying job and that I would be moving in with them as I was unable to make the rent. However, it served to reveal to me their actual mindset. "We don't need you here without your money," they said. So I do. The majority of people would describe me as successful. My name is Michelle. I am a 26-year-old investment manager at one of the city's leading companies. Even though I rent a lovely flat, I still have a solid career and enough money saved up to eventually purchase a home of my own. No debts, no mortgage, just as I want it. Everything was going as planned until Aunt Sarah called and made a huge difference. "Are you coming this year for Thanksgiving, Michelle, honey?" I smiled when I heard her kind voice. My own mother had never been as much of a mother to me as Aunt Sarah. I said, "Of course I wouldn't miss it," anticipating her renowned apple pie. What? Who else would be there surprised me. I should probably clarify why my aunt's call meant so much to me. You know, it's been 8 years since I last spoke to my parents or my older sister Jessica. Not since my high school graduation day. My letter of acceptance to college with a partial scholarship for financial management arrived just now. I was over the moon. It was all I had hoped for. I thought my folks would be proud, so I hurried home to inform them. Rather, I received the talk that would destroy our family. "Michelle, we are unable to cover your education expenses." Without barely raising her gaze from her magazine, Mom murmured, "Our whole money is needed for your sister's upcoming wedding. But what about the money that Grandma had?" I recall my voice trembling. "She bequeathed it especially for my schooling." "You promised her." Dad shuffled in his chair uneasily. "Things change, honey. Jessica's wedding is more crucial right now. You'll find a solution." Everything I had been suppressing for years finally spilt out at that point. Like everything else about Jessica, this has always been more significant. The ensuing debate was heated. Tears and accusations erupted from years of feeling inferior. I packed my things that night and went to the only person who had ever treated me decently, Aunt Sarah. Without hesitation, she accepted me in. I was unaware at the time that she had been putting money aside for her own son's schooling, but she offered it to me after he passed away in a car accident a few years prior. I only agreed to accept if I promised to reimburse her in full when I graduated and found employment. Those were difficult college years. I worked part-time in a cafe while maintaining my grades and scholarship. However, I survived. Landed a job at a prestigious investment firm, and 2 years later paid back every cent to Aunt Sarah. Life was good. I had my freedom, my job was prospering, and I had deliberately avoided any touch with my family until that Thanksgiving invitation. I almost dropped the pumpkin pie I was holding as I stepped into Aunt Sarah's house on Thanksgiving. My sister Jessica, my parents, and her 2 children, ages 3 and 6, were all seated in the living room as if they were supposed to be there. 8 years of diligently avoiding them gone in 1 second. Michelle. Aunt Sarah came running over to assist me with the pie. Her eyes were contrite. I was unaware of their arrival. They simply arrived. In the entryway, I stood still. My heart is racing. Mom had more gray in her hair than I recalled, and she appeared older. Dad was heavier. Jessica. She still had the golden child's appearance, though, despite having 2 children dangling from her arms. I need to breathe. After saying that, I turned around and made my way directly to the back porch. I hardly noticed the cold November air. I clutched the railing with trembling hands. Michelle, I tensed as I heard Mom's voice behind me. Can we have a conversation? You want to speak after 8 years of silence? I didn't look back. Why are you even here? I heard her footsteps on the wooden boards as she approached to stand by me, because we were mistaken. Your father and we've spent years feeling bad about what we did. Our goal is to put things right. So why didn't you give us a call? Write email. And I didn't mean for the words to sound so cutting. We felt embarrassed, and Mom's eyes welled up with tears. I'm very embarrassed. We promised ourselves that we would get in touch, but it got increasingly difficult as time went on. We knew it might be our only opportunity to meet you in person when we learned you would be here for Thanksgiving, to express our sincere regret for everything. I stood there, my mind racing. There was a part of me that wanted to yell at her to tell me all the times they had made me feel less significant than Jessica. An additional component? Well, another section observed how worn out she appeared and how her hands shook while she spoke. I finally said, I need time to think. Here it is. It's quite a bit. Naturally, she nodded quickly. Take as much time as you require. When you're ready, we'll be here. The remainder of the evening flew by. I took a seat quietly in a corner, Sarah's living room, avoiding eye contact while moving the turkey about my plate. As promised, Jessica and my parents didn't press. They played with the children, talked to other family members, and helped with the dishes while occasionally giving me sly looks. I observed them while they weren't looking. Mom is assisting, Sarah in the kitchen, Dad amusing Jessica's kids. Jessica seemed to be both confident and unsure at the same time. Despite their best efforts to give me space, they were everywhere in the house for 2 weeks following Thanksgiving. I couldn't think of anything else. I would relive that exchange with Mom on Aunt Sarah's porch every morning when I woke up. I would lie awake every night questioning if it was wise for me to even entertain the possibility of forgiveness. One evening, I sat in my flat and gazed at my phone. There was still Mom's number preserved. I would never remove it. However, I was unable to explain why. Perhaps I had always known this day would arrive. It seemed like hours passed while my finger lingered over the call button. I finally inhaled deeply before pressing it. Just 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Michelle. Mom's voice was guarded, hopeful. Hello, Mother. A slight crack came to my voice. What you mentioned at Thanksgiving has been on my mind. I might want to give it a go. The words came out of my mouth slowly and felt weird. We might be able to start over. A week later, I was standing outside the house where I grew up, with a bag of thoughtfully selected presents. Just things that are considerate, nothing fancy. I got a scarf for Mom and a book that Dad had said he wanted for years. For Jessica's children, some instructive toys. The home appeared more dilapidated and smaller than I had recalled. The garden that Mom used to care for so carefully was overgrown, and the paint was flaking in some spots. I had not grown up in this immaculate suburban house before I could even ring the doorbell. The door flew open. Mom stood there looking anxious but thrilled. "You arrived?" "I came." I nodded. Stepping inside the interior was just as telling as the exterior. The carpet was worn in spots, and the furniture was the same as it had been 8 years previously, but it was now clear that the walls required a new coat of paint. Dad came out of the kitchen with a confused expression. Jessica was there to her kids, hiding between her legs. I passed out the gifts, observing their reactions as they unwrapped them. The scarf brought tears to Mom's eyes, and the book made Dad smile. Over supper, Mom had cooked my favorite lasagna from childhood. The reality of their life came to light. Jessica had to return home with the children after her marriage ended horribly 2 years prior. Dad had to accept a lower-paying job after his firm shrank, and Mom's health issues had forced her to work part-time at the library. "Michelle, how about you?" Jessica pushed her food gently around her plate and inquired, "How is work going?" "Good," I said, attempting to keep my tone neutral. "I'm at Morton and Associates now. Downtown is home to a major investment business." The rest of the evening continued like that. Thorough discussions steered clear of subjects and an underlying conflict that no one wanted to discuss. It seemed anything but usual, since we were all trying so hard to be normal. Something changed throughout the ensuing weeks. During lunch breaks, Jessica began to visit my office, typically bringing 2 cups of coffee from the downstairs cafe. We would reminisce over 8 years of lost discussions while sitting in the building's courtyard. She shared her failed marriage with me, describing how her ex-husband was bad with money and extremely awful with commitment. I started to genuinely look forward to family gatherings as Christmas drew near. However, I needed to create a coffee maker first. Aunt Sarah opened the present and giggled. "Is there anything you want to tell me about my instant coffee?" "Perhaps." I smiled and gave her a strong embrace. "Aunt Sarah, I am so grateful that you were there for me when I needed you the most." She studied my face while keeping me at arm's length. "Are you content, my love, given the state of affairs in your family?" "I believe I am," I responded, astonished by how accurate it seemed. Now it's different. The stressful meal from my first visit was nothing like the better Christmas at my parents' place. Dad was really singing songs while assisting in the kitchen, and Mom had decorated every square inch of the space. After viewing their gifts, a science kit for Emily and a collection of toy dinosaurs for Jack and Michelle, Jessica's children, Emily and Jack, had finally warmed up to me. They would climb all over me and squeal. "Can you assist us in constructing the volcano?" I became aware of how much I had missed having a family as I watched them play with their new toys. Even my parents appeared more at ease, joking and laughing like they did when I was a child. After several months, we settled into a routine. Sunday meals started to become commonplace. Jessica and I had our coffee dates. Then came the spring break excursion. It wasn't my plan. Actually, Mom mentioned that the children had never seen the ocean, and I just heard her say that. "Come on," I said without thinking. "I'll make all the reservations next week." Seeing the expressions on Emily and Jack's cheeks when they first saw the water made that vacation truly unforgettable. As they leaped over waves, I could hear their squeals, constructing sand castles with my father, much as I did when I was little. It was worth every cent. I wasn't totally shocked when Mom and Dad wanted to speak with me one evening after dinner, since after the vacation, everything felt even more natural. The house's plumbing system, Dad's expression changed to one of discomfort. "It's not good. We hate to ask, but we've been putting off repairs. We could really need some assistance," but Mom stepped right in. That's where I wrote them a check. Even though it wasn't much, it was worthwhile to witness their relief. Other demands came after that, nothing out of the ordinary. When the original water heater died, a new one was installed. Help with Jessica's kids, school supplies, simple things the family assists each other with. Mom dropped the bomb at a typical Sunday supper. She had pushed her food around her plate rather than eating and had been quieter than normal during the dinner. She finally spoke out as her father was serving dessert. Her voice cracked as she replied, "I lost my job. My position is one of the ones being slashed at the library. I'm not sure how we're going to proceed. The house payments, the medical costs." As my mother clutched her coffee cup, I saw that her hands were shaking. Seen the lines of anxiety becoming deeper on Dad's face. They appeared elderly and unexpectedly exposed. The words were out of my mouth before I could even comprehend what I was saying. "I am able to assist. I can afford $2,500 a month," I told myself. "It's not an issue." Their features showed instant and overwhelming relief. Mom broke down once more, but this time she was happy. Dad stood up and gave me such a strong embrace that I was having trouble breathing. Our new normal was born. Like clockwork, I deposited the funds into their account each month. Even while they occasionally stated requiring something specific, they never requested for more than we had agreed upon. New winter boots for Jack or replacement for their outdated microwave. Jessica and I got even closer at this time when I had to travel for work. I began to take her with me wherever I could. Nothing overly ostentatious. Chicago for a weekend, Boston for 3 days, a brief excursion to Miami. It's just sisters catching up. Life settled into a routine that was comforting. Sunday supper, monthly transfers, and sporadic outings with Mum for shopping, assisting Jessica's children with their assignments. Although it wasn't flawless, it had the feel of family. The call that would alter everything then arrived. Michelle. My landlord, Mrs. Peterson, sounded sorry. "I need to discuss the flat with you. In a few months, my grandson will graduate from college. They will be employed in the city. I did promise him the flat, though." "Oh," I muttered, surveying the area I had occupied for so long. On a whim, the wall had been painted a light blue. On rainy days, I enjoyed a read from the window seat. "I apologize," she said. "You've been a good tenant. You have plenty of time to find anything else, I promise." Naturally. I hung up and sat by the window, where I often sit, contemplating. Despite supporting my family, I have been saving hard throughout the years. I had a healthy investing portfolio. Perhaps this was not even a setback. Perhaps I was being prodded by the cosmos. During my lunch breaks and after work, I saw apartments with my realtor, Sarah, throughout the course of the following few weeks. I knew exactly what I wanted, something contemporary, near the office, and spacious enough to accommodate a home office. A corner flat in a brand new building 3 blocks from my place of employment particularly excited me. I could already envision myself here having coffee on the terrace, holding dinner parties in the open concept kitchen, but I kept it all to myself, intending to surprise my family with the news after everything was completed. "I'm sorry, Mom, but I'm unable to attend Sunday's supper." During our weekly call, I stated, "There are some issues at work." One evening, Aunt Sarah called as I was sorting through paint swatches. She spoke in a tight, controlled voice. "Michelle, can you come over? We must speak. It's crucial." She appeared more anxious than I had ever seen her when I saw her pacing her kitchen. She hardly waited for me to take a seat before she started talking. Today, I heard something. Her hands encircling a chilly coffee cup, she started. "Something you need to know?" Karen and Linda belonged to a book group. Linda and Karen, longtime family friends who'd known us since I was a youngster. My aunt went on, painting herself with every word. They were discussing last week's encounter at the grocery store with Jessica and your parents, apparently after you began providing them with financial support. Many people have heard about you from your family. What are you saying? Speaking. However, I could already feel a chill creep into my chest. She joked that they had finally found a use for your fancy job and said bluntly, "They've been calling you their personal ATM behind your back. Jessica has been telling people that you will cover the entire cost of the vacation if she only mentions that she wants to travel somewhere." The room appeared to slant to one side. That isn't possible. There's more. Now Aunt Sarah spoke softly. Mom has been boasting that she doesn't actually need to get a new job because Michelle is a good investment. Michelle, they've been giggling about it, making mockery of your desire to assist them. I felt as though someone had hit me in the stomach as I sat there. I had a part that wanted to protect them, to deny it. However, I was aware that Aunt Sarah would never fabricate this. Abruptly, little details began to fall into place. The way they shift the topic whenever my work comes up, how they've started asking for help more frequently, and the shrewd glances I occasionally saw them exchange. "I'm so sorry, my love." Aunt Sarah extended her hand to grasp mine. "I was on the fence about telling you, but you should know." I sat there for a while reflecting about the previous year. Mom's appreciative tears when I assisted with expenses, the monthly transfers, the family dinners, and the outings with Jessica. Had it all been an act? Then gradually, a concept began to take shape. 2 days later, I stood outside my parents' house with 2 pack bags, having spent the morning transferring all my furniture to Ansari's garage. I had prepared every detail and practiced this. I inhaled deeply before pressing the doorbell. The door was opened by Mom. Her expression was one of surprise. "What are you doing here, Michelle? Why are the suitcases there?" Behind her, Dad and Jessica showed up equally perplexed. Excellent. I let my lower lip shake, blinking fast as if keeping back tears. "I lost my job. I choked out when they discovered some errors in my work and there were budget cuts. I'm being forced to repay bonuses. My flat is no longer within my means. In order to get back on my feet, I was thinking that I would be able to stay here for a few months." After precisely 3 seconds of quiet, Mom's worried face changed into something strange and unsightly. "Does this imply that you will no longer be providing us with the monthly payment?" she demanded, all pretense of sympathy gone from her voice. Despite my expectations, I felt my heart break a bit. "I won't have any extra cash for a time, Mum." Anger colored Jessica's cheeks as she stepped forward. "What about our trip to Europe the following month? The one you promised to take me on?" I made myself keep up the act, even though my hands were shaking. I merely shook my head, gazing at the floor. At that point, chaos ensued. "You foolish, careless girl." "Mom!" I flinched at the scream. "How could you have allowed this to occur? Which type of investment manager is let go?" Dad, his cheeks flushed with anger, joined in. "We ought to have anticipated that you would mess things up, the same way you ruined everything else." Jessica spit out, "You can't stay here." I pick up my bags. There isn't any space, and I'm not sharing my space with a failure. My sister hauled my bags to the front porch and tossed them outside like trash while I stared in startled silence. These were the same individuals who'd hugged me at Christmas, who'd shed thankful tears when I helped them, who professed to be so sorry for the past. "Mom, without your money, we wouldn't need you here," smudged. "After getting dismissed in this manner, you will never be able to find another good work. A deadbeat is not someone we're supporting." As I stood there, I absorbed everything. At last, the masks had come off, exposing the unsightly reality underneath. Every family time, every reconciliation, every Sunday meal, the entire performance had been planned. Aunt Sarah had been correct. Now look at them. The distorted face of Mom. Dad's face was flushed. Jessica's contemptuous sneer. I felt unusually peaceful. Without a word, Something that had been dangling inside of me finally broke free. I turned and proceeded to my baggage behind me. A chorus of obscenities emerged from their voices. "Leech! Unappreciative brat! Don't make a hasty return!" Their cries followed me like irate insects as I silently pushed my baggage down the driveway. I couldn't force myself to care that the neighbors were now looking in through their windows. I returned to Aunt Sarah's place 20 minutes later. She opened her arms after glancing at my face. I eventually let the tears fall and fell into them. Didn't they reveal their true selves? She stroked my hair and whispered. I forced a meek grin and took out my phone. I started by canceling the monthly transfer to Mom's account on my banking app. Then I brought up the travel website where I booked Jessica's fantasy European vacation. The flight tickets and hotel reservation were canceled with 2 clicks. The 2 weeks I spent it out, Sarah's seemed like a cocoon, a secure area to contemplate all that had transpired. During that time, my realtor called with exciting news. "Do you recall your favorite corner unit? Your offer was accepted by the seller. Everything moved quickly after that. The final walkthrough, inspections, and paperwork all turned into a haze of meetings and signatures. Before I knew it, I was standing in my very own apartment, holding the keys in my trembling hands. I was assisted by Aunt Sarah in moving everything from her garage. Over the course of a weekend, we hung artwork, arranged furniture, and made the room genuinely mine. She even insisted on assisting me in choosing new drapes for the windows that extend from floor to ceiling. That evening, after Aunt Sarah left, I did something impulsive. With the city lights sparkling behind me through the enormous windows, I snapped a picture of myself in my new living room. I captioned it and shared it on social media. Dreams do come true. A homeowner at last. No loans, no mortgage. Years of diligence are now paying off. I knew what I was doing. They would see it, I knew. A part of me also desired them. My phone did really ring. The screen flashed Mom's number less than 2 hours later. I inhaled deeply before responding. "What's this picture about?" She made a demand. "Which flat?" "I believed you were let go." I felt surprisingly at ease as I sat down in my new armchair. "No, Mama, I wasn't let go. I continue to be successful and employed, and I recently became a homeowner. I only needed to test something." Test something? An octave was added to her voice. In the distance, I could hear Jessica and Dad. "Indeed, I wanted to know if you genuinely cared about me or simply my money. When you called me a leech and dumped my baggage out on the porch, I suppose I got my response." A moment of startled quiet fell. On the opposite end of the queue, then, mayhem broke out. Dad was scolding Jessica with yelling something about dishonesty, and Mom's voice turned sickeningly sweet. "Sweetheart, we were just stunned and worried about you. We do care about you, of course. We can put this small joke of yours behind us. Everything can go back to normal." I genuinely laughed out loud. "Typical? You mean the place where I foot the bill while you make fun of me behind my back? But don't worry about a leech. Bills can be paid by you." "Oh, and I canceled your European tickets, Jessica. Instead, I suppose I'll go alone. Farewell." I hung up and instantly blocked their phones. I then blocked them on every social media platform. Setting down a heavy weight that I had been carrying for too long felt like that. They tried phoning from different numbers. They sent emails. A few days later, they even arrived at my workplace building. However, I had already alerted security. The sight of them being turned away by the guards should have hurt. But I was just relieved. That weekend, Aunt Sarah came over for dinner in my new home. I'd made her favorite lasagna, and we sat on my balcony watching the sunset. "Are you all right?" As she refilled our wine glasses, she inquired. "Everything I require is right here," I remarked, lifting my glass. "A home of my own, a career I adore, and the one family member who ever actually mattered. Aunt Sarah clinked her glass against mine, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights come alive below us. Sometimes I realize the family you choose is better than the family you're born into, and often the hardest lessons lead to the most beautiful beginnings.